everybody. So this is the microphone that's going to capture everybody. And if it's not quiet enough, or if it's too quiet, let us know. But we've got Lisa Culp Taylor and Jack Miller and Barbara Moutenot and Mary Beth Thomas and then Bonadies over there, who's about to pop back on the screen here. And so just give us like a kind of a quick 1 minute, who you are, where do you work, how long you've been in the business, that whole jazz.
I'm Lisa Culp Taylor. I'm with the Franklin Parks office, and I have been in real estate 25 years, and so mostly in Williamson County, but some in South Nashville.
I'm Jack Miller. I work out of the Brentwood office, Parks corporate office. Been in the business 24 years. My business partner is Robert Stutz. He's off camera today, as usual. And we love it here. Love this joint venture, also, nice. I would say.
Yeah. Barbara Moutenot. I am out of this office on Hillsborough Road, or 21st Avenue. I've been an agent for 20 years, maybe 21, something like that. Yep.
I'm Mary Beth Thomas. I worked at Parks prior to coming here to Village. I've been practicing real estate about 27 years. And really excited to learn from everybody here on the panel.
Mary Brooke from Bonadies. I feel like a newbie. I've only been in the business like 12 years, so I'm like the new gal on the street here. I'm out of this office, and I've been here going on 3 years.
That's awesome. You've been in the business for a long time.
Oh yeah. But at Village.
That's great. All right, so you all are I was pulling on some of your numbers. Pretty impressive, by the way. I think collectively, you all have done in the last, I was just doing a little bit of math. It looks like, I don't know, almost $250 million in transactions in the last year. So I'm going to say it one more time, $250 million in transactions in the last year. So no small feat. Anybody else want to do that? So really impressive. So the term luxury is I think an overused term. I think it's always funny. You can drive anywhere in town and you see a crane and then it says luxury apartments. It's like, what does that even mean? So do you like the term luxury? Do you have a different term to use instead? What does that mean? What defines a quote high-end or luxury listing versus something else? Is it all about price point? Is it about location? Is it about the clientele? Like, what does that mean to you all? Feel free to just jump in.
I was thinking about that today. What does luxury mean? I think that's definitely changed in the past couple of years, whereas little homes that used to be modest are selling for a lot of money. Now, is it a luxury home? I don't think so, but I think that fixtures and finishes, location, there are a lot of elements that go into a luxury home, and of course price point, but that is such a variable these days. I think that perhaps for myself, when I look at a luxury listing, it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. So I think we have to think of a new word to, whatever that might be. Yeah, but going forward, it's definitely changing.
I think that we have to use a price point as a common place to start talking about luxury, because you have to have some place to talk about it. But to Barbara's point, she's exactly right. A luxury home in West Nashville could be $1 million home, but that $1 million home could literally have, laminate countertops. So not necessarily luxury finishes. Mm-hmm. So it depends on where you are in the market, what market you're in. Mm-hmm. But I think for me personally, if someone asks about what do you consider luxury price points to be, I think for us, looking at, Nashville proper, starting with a condo in the urban core, working down through West Nashville, Brentwood, and Franklin, that's probably 90% of our luxury market, I would say, for our market. And I think that for single family homes, whereas for many years we'd say, oh, if it's over 700,000, it's luxury. Well, 700,000, I don't really think is a luxury home anymore. To me, a luxury property for single family is probably north of $1 million as a starting point, and probably for condos, probably north of $500,000. That's just random numbers out of my head, but.
so I think somebody told me this once, and it made sense. They said, you know, a luxury listing or high-end listing it's all just like real estate, it's neighborhood and market specific.
Mhm.
They said it's really just the top 10 or 20% of that particular market, right?
Sure.
So, be it size, uniqueness, price. I mean, I think price is the easiest common denominator you can have. So, so you all have all done, you all do a lot of, I'm going to just use the word luxury, even though I don't like it, because I've yet to find another word that replaces it. You have all done a lot of luxury listings and sales. So I think agents will always ask, how do you tap into that market? And when you do it for a while, you just are in that market, and then it's kind of like, well, that's just what I do, right? Because you get referrals from that. But at some point, each of you tapped into that. And Jack, I know you have a really cool story about some ads that you did, that you told a long time ago, that I thought was neat. That was a costly, expensive way of doing it, but it worked for you. And so how did you all get into that? Did it just happen just based on your network, or did you aim for that?
I think it just happens organically to some degree. You sell a house to someone, then they move up, they hopefully call you back, and it just somewhat organically happens, in my opinion.
I would agree with that, but I think you can also agree to the Skids. I know for me and Robert, we actually started our business in Smyrna 24 years ago. That certainly was not a luxury home market. And we determined that coming out of a corporate background, we really wanted to service the luxury home market. And we said, well, we need to go where the luxury homes are. So that was kind of the impetus for us moving to Brentwood and then Green Hills, was to kind of get in the middle of where the luxury home market was. So location has a big bearing on it too. It's much harder to tap into the luxury home market if you're sitting, 3 levels of price points below it. So being there I think is half the battle.
So how does that work, being there? What does that mean?
Well, physically moving your office space there. I think it's hard when someone looks at your website, your business card, any of your digital marketing, whatever they're looking at. Everything we do has to showcase our brand in a luxury frame. And so if you want to be perceived as a luxury broker, you could be selling nothing luxury, but if you showcase your brand properly, that's a way to tap into that market, not organically, but by intent to kind of, as I said, grease the skids to get into the market if you don't happen to already be immersed in the market.
And so, and then being present, maybe that's give something.
I kind of more with Lisa. That's been more my history. Like you start with back in the day, back in the early 90s when I started, I worked with a lot of young physicians. So you work with a young physician, they have a very little budget, but then eventually they grow up and then they start making more money, and then they need to move to the next house, and then they have children, and then they need a little larger home, and then that starts to expand. Then they start telling their friends, and then I ended up selling one person who's in the music industry, helped them with their first house that was like $700,000. Well, their last house that they sold was $8 million. So you just taking care of your database, taking care of my clients and friends. And then I like that. For me, I like that book of business. I'd much rather work in that world than I would the social media people I don't know very well.
So it's really the fundamentals, taking good care of people,
Right.
in order to get repeat clients, because as we all know, that doesn't just happen, right? The stats are terrible in terms of repeat business. You actually have to stay in touch with your clients and your people and take good care of them. Barbara, what about you? How did you get into the luxury market?
Well, similar to Mary Beth, and starting a lot of musicians, because my husband is in that world, and they make a little money, then they make more money, and they make a lot of money, and it just goes and goes and goes. But going back to your point, Zach, even though you are selling these luxury houses to people that have a lot of money, everybody thinks, or a lot of people think it's easy. Oh, it's so easy. All these people. It's not that easy. And you do have to be very intentional. You have to stay in touch. You have to be so patient, because 50% of the time they're going to set an appointment and then they're going to cancel it. And you have to, do a lot of things that you would do with anybody really, but you definitely have to have a lot of patience
And
and
then you have to deal with the other level of
Yeah.
the business managers.
business managers and
the
your,
financial people.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of other people that are influencing whether this buyer is going to actually buy the house or not.
and the business managers are much more concerned than the buyer. So you have to please a lot of people. You know, I'm not gonna say, it's a lot of work, it's all a lot of work, but it's very intentional, you know.
So dealing with a business manager makes dealing with parents look easy.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Well said.
And so really, your client is the organization, right? I mean, and I think there's a lot of fear on business managers and parents, those outside people that come in. There's fear that, oh my gosh, especially a business manager, if this client of mine, artist, whatever, makes a bad decision, I'm gonna get blamed for it and I might get fired for it. And it's a small town and I may never go to work here again.
That's
So-
right.
So they're probably, knowing who the constituents are is really key.
Mhm.
So you mentioned there are some things that you do differently. Obviously, there's the buyer side and the list side. You're both dealing with people, but on the listing side, what are some different things like I get asked this question a lot. Oh, I've got my first $1 million+ listing. What do I do differently? How do I market $1 million listing? And I think there's a variety of answers. But what do you all do? Do you do anything different? Do you treat your $500,000 houses just the same way as your $5 million houses, or are there different, events or marketing or whatever it is that you do? How do you all handle that?
Well, I mean, Jack and I talked a little bit about this downstairs. One of the questions said something about what photographer do you use? I use the same photographer on a $500,000 house or even a $275,000 house I just listed that I am on a $6 million house. And they get the same marketing to a degree. So I'm not necessarily going to put a $275,000 house in the Luxury Home magazine,
Right.
but I am going to put all of my luxury homes in that magazine. I'm also going to potentially host a realtor event, depending on the house. If it's a special house, it's got special features that you really need to see to fully understand. I'm going to have a realtor event, and it's not going to be, stuff I'm picking up from Costco and, not that there's anything wrong with that. I've done that many, many times. So,
Well, the other thing too is you may use the same, as we talked, you may use the same photographer. We do as well. So you give the same level of quality regardless of price point. But what's different on your luxury properties, if they're feature rich in terms of finishes and the way they're fitted, there's a lot more to talk about in a typical luxury home than there is in a typical listing. So you can't just say, stainless appliances. You've got to go through and list each kind. Wolf, Sub-Zero, how many burners does it have? These are all big deals to the more discriminating consumer who's working the luxury home market. They're not looking for stainless and hardwood. They want to know, is it 5-inch wide planks? Is it 6-inch wide planks? What stain it is, what brand? And you don't just put an appliance package in where everything's Thermador. It's probably going to be a mixture of very high end. And that was really interesting. I found that when buyers themselves, as Barbara was talking about, are making that move through the various price points, and they're kind of being educated to the market, they're often surprised as they're moving up the chain, so to speak, that, oh, you mean all the appliances, aren't GE? They're all different appliances. Why didn't they get all one kind? Well, that's not unusual in the luxury home market. Finishes are oftentimes, each one is picked because it's the best of its brand.
Sometimes who the builder is, or who the architect is,
Right.
or what.
Who the interior designer is,
yeah.
who the landscape architect is. Those are all very important features that you can't put on a one-page fly sheet. So although you may do a high-end brochure, you may do high-end photography, there's a lot more to talk about typically in the luxury listings.
Mary Brooke, what about you? Do you have anything you do differently? On a higher end listing?
I do sometimes use different photographers.
Okay.
And then video, I think, is really important nowadays for people to walk through and kind of get a sense of the space. And then a lot of, I guess, it depends on where it is, but then like the drone footage of the neighborhood and, because a lot of these people are moving from California, New York, they don't know the neighborhood. So, and those can get super expensive. So I don't necessarily do that on a, small condo or sometimes have stock videos, but you know, it's not specific to that particular property.
Yeah.
Do any of y'all use Matterport consistently?
Not
Not
consistently.
consistently. Okay. I just was curious because they make me a little queasy when I look at them. So I never use them. So, but then I have had clients ask about that and I'm like, sure, we can do that if you want.
I love it.
I just was curious.
Yeah, I love the technology of Matterport, honestly. One of the things I've run into is a lot of sellers on the high end have private spaces and personal spaces they don't want on video. They would rather have a selection of photos and say, these you can use, these we don't want to use. We don't want to show where our safe room is. You know, we don't want to show kids' bedrooms with kids' pictures and where it's located in the house. Or that, you know, particularly when you're talking about celebrity clients, they're real cognizant of that because they're always worried about who's going to know where they live and where the bedrooms are and that sort of thing. So I think Matterport's really cool, but I'm a little reluctant to use it in video interior for that reason.
So almost showing, it's like if you open up a architectural digest magazine, you're not seeing every room in the house. You're seeing very
That's right.
curated, very specific angles and views of the most beautiful spaces, almost as a teaser, just to kind of whet your appetite and want more, right?
That's right.
So that's interesting because yeah, I love Matterport. I've sold a few houses sight unseen from Matterport tours from people out of town, and it's blown my mind. And I think they're a highly useful tool. But I do see that that's a really valid concern, especially with the seller who's got some privacy concerns, because everyone in the world now has a full layout of their house.
Right.
So that's interesting. Okay, so from a marketing standpoint, I know a lot of you all have done events in different capacities. Lisa Culp Taylor has sent me 2 invitations recently, and one came with a little bundt cake. I mean, like as an invitation to an event, like unbelievable. Like that's not Costco, right? That's not going out. That takes a lot of effort, a lot of thought, and a lot of planning. And quite frankly, a lot of agents think it's a great idea and they have no idea how to execute that or who to invite or what to do. And so like talk through your process when you're doing events. One, do you like doing events? What is the benefit? Because you're inviting a lot of other agents, right? And not all of those agents will have buyers, but how do you do it? How do you pick who to invite?
So it depends on the house, depends on the location, but we go through the top agents that in the last year have had high-end sales. And so then we invite them, and we all know we could have breakfast, lunch, and dinner and cocktails every night if we wanted to. So I just feel like you have to do something a little different to make sure your invitation is seen. So we deliver a bundt cake, or I think we did pies one time, and we try not to do the same thing over and over. So
You've done
then
a bottle of champagne.
we've done bottle of champagne.
Appreciate
Yes,
that.
no problem. So we've done different events, and then we also so we deliver the invitation, we send emails, we send text messages, and we do a lot of follow-up to make sure we get a good amount of people there. And so usually we end up with somewhere between 60 and 75. So we have a caterer, we have wait staff, especially during COVID. You don't want everybody touching different things. So, we have past hors d'oeuvres and cocktails and all those type things, but we really do it on special houses. So we've done one where that it was a builder's house that was being sold fully furnished. And we put it on the market that morning, had the event that evening. During the event, we signed a contract for $750,000 over ask.
I was there.
Yes.
That's it.
And so that's a great success story. Well, from that, we were posting pictures and everything on social media. I got a call that night at like 8:30. Granted, I probably had a little to drink by then, but he's like, because, you're done with the event, you're kind of, and he's like, listen, I've seen all the pictures on social media. I want you to list my house. And I'm like, sure, when do you want me to come over, And so I then did get a listing from that. And I said, well, you've already reduced your house more than you're telling me you want to sell it for. So we got to do something different. We added all the furniture in, we listed it. We did an event because he was so up on the event. That's what got me in the door. We had an event. We did it as a sunset because there was unbelievable views, and everybody hung out because they wanted to see, everybody was taking pictures. So I had all these agents taking pictures, but they're, kind enough to tag me in it. We got the house sold. So, we've done a couple of others. We did one that's the Champagne one we did in Annandale. So, I mean, it works, but it's really expensive. I mean, but
What is an event, like, what does it cost to run, to kind of soup to nuts, cater bottles of champagnes? Is that $2,000, $10,000?
so the full event on the very first one, because we also had to have golf carts because it was a steep driveway. So we had people running the golf carts. It's $2,000 to rent golf carts for, a few days. That one costs, and then we have goodie bags for everybody when they leave, just as a little thank you for coming. And so all in all, the first one cost around $12,000. The second one more like $6,000, and then the third one is really nice when they impart themselves. The third one I think was about $6,000 too.
All right. So, but in the scheme of things for the listing and your compensation, that's an investment.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and you look at the first one got me the second one. So, it's, and in that instance, it was a builder, and he's like, hey, how much do I owe you for the party? And I'm like, I got this, and then he's happy because he hasn't cost him anything. So it's just, it's a cost of doing business.
That's incredible.
I want to mention something too, because we don't do a lot of events, and Lisa does a remarkable job. Mary Beth does too. I've been to some of hers, but I wanted to say too, as someone who gets invited to every single event like that, I go to very few of them. The ones that we go to, and I'm saying this because I think that a lot of agents miss the boat on this. Here's what happens a lot of times. I get a call from somebody that I've never heard of, who works for somebody that I've never heard of. And they say, so-and-so is so impressed that they really want you because they're so impressed with your business. It's so important to have you there. I said, well, then why doesn't so-and-so call me?
Yeah.
So if you have a really important event and you want top level brokers to be there, if you're not already networked with them in a real personal, meaningful way, make a personal call because it makes a big difference. I've gone to a lot of broker opens. I don't do a lot of broker opens, do very few actually. But the ones I go to are my friends, people who are sitting at this table right here, are our friends and colleagues that we have an established history with. Or when someone makes a point to pick up the phone, make a personal call and say, it would really mean a lot if you would come to this. I've seen you sold other properties like this in the area. Can I count on you to be there? And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll be there. It makes a huge difference.
Well, it's funny. Jack was teasing me because somebody ate his bundt cake. So I literally had another bundt cake delivered for him.
She did. It's true.
But the other thing too is
Somebody was my son, I think. But anyway,
could be. I don't know who it was, but and so the one thing I'll say though is when the people do attend your events like that, you better believe. Like I'm going to tell you that Matt Daniel and Diane Christian always seem to come to my events. So when they were having one in Timms Ford Lake, which is 2 hours away, I knew there weren't going to be that many people going. I was like piling people in the car and we were going down there because you have to reciprocate. When people are doing something for you and attending your events, you better put a note and make sure you're attending theirs.
Yep.
And Lisa made a good point too. If you've got that level of player at your event, that means they've got a big following already and they're tagging you on social media at the event. It's just terrific all the way around.
Yeah, it's true. You do have to, if somebody's going to go out of their way to go to your broker open, no matter what it is, party, no party, you're just having an open house. And we all do it. We go to each other's, we support each other, and that's how it gets done. As I say to my clients, 95% of the time, it's another agent that's going to sell your property. So who are you going to support?
And I think at the event, the extra blessing that happens is you get a chance to talk to other agents face to face, collaborate, talk. What buyers do you have that they're looking for something? Oh, I've got this coming on the market. So I think that connectivity is really important. So I'm planning an event for December 2nd.
By the way.
For example.
For example.
So for example, it's a house that Brandon White did, and I had a big party during COVID at this house that I'm just going to kind of give you a little walk in my head of how I kind of do this. But I've been thinking, what's my theme going to be? It's going to be December 2nd, and he wants it on a Thursday, and he really wants a big party, and it's to be the biggest and the best that we've ever done. It's going to be a $4+ million. I'm like, God, what am I going to do? There's only 3 Thursday evenings in December. So I bet there's going to be a lot of Christmas parties. So I just don't think I should do it at night. So I talked to a couple of other agents. I found out what they think. So now I'm going to do a brunch. And so I'm going to do a really nice Christmas gathering brunch thing. So then I'm like thinking, okay, Brandon's fancy. He's classy. So I'm constantly driving around town thinking about what can my theme be. And so I'm working with my assistant back there, and we're talking, and I've been obsessed with this song. I forget the guy's name, but this song is Fancy Like Applebee's. Is anybody?
Yes, oh my God.
Fancy Like Applebee's, like, whatever. And you got that.
Catering my
You got those. You got
Yeah.
those. You got the 2 straws. So I've been thinking this is like, come to my party. It's fancy like, this house is fancy like Brandon White. So I've been thinking about this, and I don't know if Brandon's going to be like horrified by the things, but in my ideal world, we would have the email invitation go out. It's going to be saying fancy like Brandon White. So I give each one of my events a ton of time. I think what's going to pull people in, and I go through revision after revision of my invitations and the brochures. Everybody that works with me probably goes crazy, but like this was a little flip card thing we did of a new construction project, and I was in the middle of ninja designing this. My mind was just going crazy. And then Christy Wilson was having her grand opening party at her new office in Green Hills that same night as we were doing our event. So I said, after you go to Christy Wilson's party, come to mine. So I always try to think what's something fresh, new, different. We had a party over on Belmont Boulevard, and we had margarita machine and mariachi band, and we had the food catered from Chago's, which was right down the street. So like taking a theme, I forget what we delivered on that one, but
But that's also bringing in, I love that, that's bringing in the local neighborhood, like a restaurant right down the street.
Mhm.
Bringing it in, that brings it all together. It's not just a house, it's a community, it's a lifestyle.
And I love delivering something to agents. I think I've done the bundt cakes, and I've done this little flip card thing was attached to a bottle of Prosecco with my signature color. So I just think for me, it's really rewarding and it's fun. And I feel like I really get to dive in. What's the heart of the house? What is important about it? We've got one coming on in the spring that has a really beautiful wine cellar. So my clients and I are talking about doing a customized bottle, I don't know, signature by some kind of special vineyard, but I love doing that. I think it's really fun, and people seem to enjoy coming to the events, and it just brings me a lot of joy.
To your point, there is so much time that goes into planning an event. It's not just picking up the phone and calling somebody. I mean, to get 60 to 75 people at an event, you're delivering like 300 bundt cakes or bottles of champagne or whatever, and you can't like have a week-old bundt cake delivered. So you pick it up and you tie everything on, and you got to be out the door, and that's to all over, several different areas. So there's a lot of time. And to Mary Beth's point, I mean, just the thinking about all the stuff, her driving around and singing that song would be,
I'm gonna do it. And the other part is I really like collaborating with other agents. Like I do a lot of work with John Brittle with the new construction things, and I love having someone to brainstorm ideas with. So co-listing on some of these luxury homes, I enjoy that part of it, like working with other people. And I do that with a number of different people, like Johnny Cleaton. I've done quite a bit with him, and Keith Merrill.
And I also encourage, even if you don't have a client that's necessarily in the market for that particular listing, call them, say, hey, I'm going to this, this party, I'm doing this, and sometimes that leads to a conversation with somebody, picking up the phone to a client and inviting them places that just, it keeps you on their mind. And then like, I'll be at a house like, who can I call about this? And then and then your brain starts thinking about like, oh, well, this person was thinking about moving last year. Maybe they're still thinking about it. This house would be great for them, or maybe not. Maybe they'll think, get them their wheels turning about moving again. So
It's interesting, you're going to a broker open and
Yeah.
then kind of using that to trigger
absolutely.
thinking through how to bring up,
Yeah.
look at your database beforehand, or your kind of one list of people who, maybe haven't moved in 7 or 10 years, but gosh, this would be great. Their kids are older now, And then how do you, because that can be an awkward thing. What if you think that could be great for somebody and then you're like, oh gosh, I haven't really talked to that person in a year. How do you make that call, or how do you not come across as quote salesy and value added if you're actually making that call and saying, hey, I just was in this house and it made me.
I think ultimately people really appreciate you thinking about them in general. And I just can kind of talk to a wall anyway. So it's like, it's not unusual for me to pick up the phone or text or, hey, just thinking about you today or so.
One of the things I think is interesting too, I've noticed over the last few years that a lot of agents who are not actively selling the luxury home market, but clearly aspire to make that leap. One of the things I've noticed is a lot of them showing up at a broker opens like this, taking photos, tagging people, posting on their social media, which I think is terrific, because what they're doing is they may not be selling anything in the luxury home market, but they're branding themselves over and over and over, utilizing other people's listings and marketing opportunities to brand their own business on social media. And that's one of those ways that's, again, not organic, it's by intent, but that's how you make those leaps. Instead of just waiting for your database to get older and make more money, obviously that's going to happen. It happens to us too, and we love that. It's a natural part of the business. But the other part of it is you can, as I said earlier, grease the skids, make it go faster. And they're doing that. And I'm seeing it working, because there's an agent that I've been mentoring with Parks a very brief time. And he's been posting all kinds of stuff on social media, not his listings. And I'm seeing him now, he's starting to pick up those own buyers and sellers himself, which is terrific.
That's fake it until you make it concept.
That's right,
We
absolutely.
did a lot of that. I mean,
We did a whole lot of
so
that, yeah.
You want to get into this, and you started doing open houses for other agents.
Mhm.
You say, hey, can I, do you need help doing an open house, or can I talk to you? Can you give me the lowdown? I'd love to. You would spend money and say, can I put it in a magazine for you?
Yep.
Right. I'll pay for the ad. I'll put your information down there, but I'm going to put my information too. And you filled in some spots with other people's listings with their permission.
Yep. Did a lot of that early on. Robert and I did a lot of, because again, when we started so many years ago, there wasn't digital advertising, it was only print. And so most of us at this table are old enough and been in the business long enough. We did a lot of print early on. And so we would do these print ads, and we would feature the types of listings that we wanted to have when we grew up. So we would have these different listings. Yeah. Other Parks brokers listings, we would contact them and ask permission to showcase their listing in our ad. And we would promote their listings month after month after month. And in the first few months, they were all everybody else's listings. And within about 6 months or so, it started to shift. And in less than a year, all the listings were our listings. But we were branding ourselves because we wanted to condense that organic period. We didn't want to wait till we were 60 to have some luxury listings. We wanted to get a head start, And the other thing to that point is, I didn't grow up in a family with wealth. Robert didn't grow up with a family with wealth. We didn't live in a neighborhood of wealth. And so if you're not already immersed in that, you've got to find some way to connect and establish credibility, and you do that through branding. And most people who have great wealth and are choosing brokers, they're not evaluating you based on your wealth. They're evaluating you based on your brand, and they're evaluating you based on your content, and your character, and your business model, and the way you return calls, your responsiveness. They don't care how much money, and knowledge helps. So they don't.
But your knowledge of some of those luxury.
That's right.
homes.
That's
And
right.
Who is the architect? Who is the builder? Who are the luxury people in town?
We sold a home, another agent had listed, it was Dave Ramsey's home. And the agent that Dave used to list is a commercial broker. She's terrific, but she's a commercial broker. She doesn't sell homes. And I noticed when she was giving the tour of the home, that she was not touring the home like typical luxury brokers do. When we go through a home, we normally hear people say, we talk about the Wolf and the Sub-Zero and the 6-burner, listing all the very distinct features and the hot buttons. Those are things that people want to hear about. It's a different animal.
So that brings it to another point. So, we have all this technology. We've got a showing service. We've got lock boxes where you can put a house in the market and you could go, deliver bun cakes while agents are showing your listings. On a lot of high-end listings, sometimes it's a request from the seller. Sometimes it's because you actually need to be there to really point out all those things to help educate the buyer's agent and the buyer what determines being present for a listing that you have for showings, and what, like, where do you draw that line, and how do you determine when and when not to do that?
It's tricky.
And how is it valuable to do?
I had a listing on Tyne Boulevard not too long ago, and it wasn't until like a few days before I was going to list it that the seller turned to me and said, well, you're going to be here for all the showings, aren't you? And I was like, I wasn't planning to, but okay. So, you know, I think that a lot of times I leave it up to them. Although if it is a celebrity's house, I will be there. I think for me, it also depends if they live there or if they're not there any longer. If they're not there any longer,
Meaning vacant.
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, even if it's staged or something, maybe I don't really need to be there unless, as Jack says, you know, to point out some things that maybe somebody won't see. You want to be there, you know, you might be the point of contact for a buyer that doesn't have an agent. So obviously you want to be there. But I think for me, it's seller driven. You know, if it's a huge house, you kind of want to be there to navigate it, to make it flow, to make it go. If it's got weird features, if it's got features that you definitely want somebody to see that they might not otherwise, to validate the price.
Right.
So, yeah, I think it depends on the situation, but I usually have it be seller driven. Yeah.
And so more kind of in the weeds on that a little bit, some agents, I hear some agents will say, oh, it's agent must be present. I hate that, right? Because it is a little bit, well, that's one more party to coordinate
Right.
with. That's, you know, you can't just set up, boom, boom, boom. I've got 16 showings lined up for all day, and we're just gonna kind of go in and see them all. But a lot of times that's, especially with an out-of-town buyer, that is an issue or a way of doing things. I personally, I love it when a listing agent is there, because as a buyer's agent, I think it makes my job really easy. And I love, you know, the scariest question, or this, you know, the scariest question I think is the one that you don't know the answer to, and when you have to say, I don't know. And so when a listing agent is there, you can ask those questions. And so, but there is some nuance where I've walked into some houses and a listing agent will open the door for me and say, here you go. And then I never talk to them and they never say anything. And that's a little awkward sometimes, because I don't, you know, then it's just awkward. And then sometimes somebody will keep me for an hour and a half, and that can be awkward too. So where's that balance of how do you read the room and understand what to show, what not to show? How do you set those expectations with the buyer's agent beforehand of why you're there and why you need to be there, and why it's valuable to be there?
I tell buyers all the time, when I see agent must be present, you're right, can be really, really helpful. When you've got an out-of-town client, and again, luxury homes, particularly releasing are selling a lot, they tend to be really, really large as compared to some of the ones, say, in historic Whitland or Richland, which same price point, but they're not large. So these homes take a long time to look at if you tour the whole home. I tell my clients, if you get into the home and you realize quickly this is not going to be a good fit, give me a signal, let me know. And I'll very diplomatically wrap it up, you know, with that agent, so we don't spend an hour and a half here in a home that you know you're not going to see. But as a courtesy, you know, the seller has prepared that home for the showing. You don't want to step in the foyer, whip around, walk out the door. That'd be rude, obviously. So we want to try to hit the high points and see, and, you know, but we also know if they're not interested in the property, we don't need to all tie up the next hour, hour and a half touring a 10,000 square foot home.
Yeah.
I typically, when I have to be present, the first thing I do after I've greeted them is say, now, would you like me to walk you through the home,
Love it.
or would you prefer to walk through on your own?
Love it.
If they say that they want to walk through on their own, I say, no problem at all. I'll just trail along behind you in case you have any questions. Because that way, if my client has asked me to be present, I don't think he means for me to open the door and let them wander through his house at will. So I do stay back. I let them do what they want, but I'm there with the idea that I'm available for questions. And halfway through, sometimes I then start giving the tour, because if they're interested, a lot of times the agent has picked up on a signal from their buyers, like, okay, we need to know more about this house. And they'll say, why don't you just go ahead and lead us through, because they keep asking questions. So I leave it up to the other agent.
And conversely, sometimes they say, Lisa, you've been so helpful today. Where's the front door again?
That does. Yeah.
Sometimes I'll call the other agent beforehand. Like if Barbara has one of her people, I'll call and say, is this one of your musicians? And do you want me to give a tour? How will it be most helpful? So we'll have a little conversation before. Sometimes I'll put on the MLS, just call the showing center and then let people schedule. And then I'll call the agent and say, you know, I'm just thinking about coming by to be there when you show the house. What time do you think you're going to be there? So they don't, you know, because some people don't want to show a house, so the agent has to be there. So I'll have make it easy for them with their scheduling. And then I'll do my best to be there if that's going to be helpful. So I do a lot of calling the agents and talking
So
about.
beforehand, kind of giving them the tool set and those high points, those, you know, here are the things that you really need to look at. Make sure there's a, you know, a bookshelf that opens into a hidden room or whatever. Like, make sure you see that. And then you're giving them the kind of the tools to look like a, you know, a cool agent to their buyer as well. I think I remember, and I called Rick French a few years ago about a listing that he had, and I wanted to show it. And he said, well, tell me a little bit about your clients. And I kind of told me a little bit about my clients and what they were looking for. He said, this isn't going to work.
I love that.
Yep.
about Rick.
Are you nuts? You don't want to show your house? And he said, you're wasting your time. That's not going to work for him. I've already had 3 like buyers with 2 little kids or whatever say that this house doesn't work for them because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
That saved him time. It saved me time.
Yeah.
It saved my buyer's time and his seller's time. And it was like, but it stood out because I was like, who does that? But that's
Rick does that.
But you know, conversely, if I know I have, let's say, some client, celebrity, whatever, whoever they are, that will walk in the door and turn around and walk out after 5 minutes, I call the agent first. If they say they have to be there, and I'll say, hey, I have to tell you, my client might walk in and in 5 minutes walk, so don't be offended. That's just how they are. So I'll tell them that ahead of time.
That's nice. That's a nice heads up. Rick, you mentioned, by the way, one of the points we haven't talked about is mentoring. I've mentored newer agents for years on this very topic, and also in branding. But Rick French was my mentor early in my career. And I didn't know Rick, but I told Robert, I said, I would love to have a business like Rick. So Robert said, why don't you call him? Okay. So I called Rick and I told him, you don't know who I am, but I'm new in the business. I love the way you market yourself and the way you're branding. And I'd love to have lunch with you sometime. And he agreed to do it. And he's been my mentor ever since. He's terrific.
He's a good one.
He's a really good one. And he has the most unique, you know, in a sea of, 20 years ago of flashy, tacky advertising, Rick had very classy, low key. And I just love his whole business model.
Mhm.
So there's a few things too with luxury listings, like a lot of times we see a listing, buyer must show proof of funds or be pre-approved before. Is that a common thing that you all do? What's the reason for that? Without, I think the question is obvious. How do you actually verify if it's real? Because there can be this level of trust where kind of who an agent is, and so you assume that their buyer, they know who it is, but we've all seen the fraudsters and the wackos that come in and pretend that they've got all this stuff, and either they're casing the place or they're trying to impress a girl or a guy, or they are just nuts.
Yes, all those.
There are red flags out there. Maybe that's the broader topic. When you list a high-end house, it brings out mostly legitimate people, and then there's always a wackadoodle every now and then. How do you identify? How do you flush them out so you don't end up? God forbid, letting your sellers get under contract and move out before you realize this person's a fraud.
Robert and I have actually hosted a panel. We've done it 2 or 3 times. It's called The $1 Million Disappointment: How to Flush Out Scam Artists in the Luxury Home Market. And so it's a really good question. I'll give you a short answer. Short answer for us is, if we're the listing broker, there are certain agents, if they were to contact us and say they have a buyer who'd like to see this, $4 million home or whatever it is, I'm not going to ask for anything. We're just going to make the appointment. And this table would be the people who would fall in that category, yourself, of course. But if a buyer calls directly, and I don't know who that buyer is, then we're going to ask for proof of funds. If it's an agent that calls me that has a history of working in the luxury home market, perhaps I don't know in person, but they've obviously got a track record of selling luxury homes, I'm just going to make the appointment. But if it's an agent who calls me from a company I don't know, and it's a name I don't know, or maybe I know the name really well, but they sell regularly $300,000, $400,000 houses, well, probably asking for proof of funds. Now, if they say, on the other hand, my client is, and they name a name, and it's a name that's a household name that we all know, we know they have the money, we're not going to ask for proof of funds. Or if I can Google, they say, oh, they're the CEO of so-and-so firm, and I Google them and look them up and look at their, wealth, then we're not going to ask for proof of funds. So it's a discriminating process. That was a long, short answer, sorry. But it depends on who the agent is and kind of where they're coming from.
And there's a lot of it is, I assume, like, if you're in the house showing it, it's just a gut, right? So there's certain questions that sometimes you can ask people. I always love going 3 layers deep with somebody. So if your antenna goes up, I mean, this happens any condo project I've ever listed, there's always 2 or 3 just whack jobs that come in, and I'll start talking to them, and they're usually very charismatic people. And you ask them, and sometimes they'll say things that are just almost too good to be true. And so, one of them the other day was like, came in a couple months ago and said, oh my, it said like 4 things that were just too grandiose, and then said, oh my, my mother was a state senator in whatever state, and I was like, oh, that's great. Like, is she still active? Or when was? Oh no, she retired. When did she retire? Right? Oh, back in. And he had a date, and I said, well, what were some of her biggest challenges? Or what party was she with? Just go like a few layers deep, and then listen for that pause, or watch their eyes a little bit, and at some point, you can kind of, again, you'll get a vibe as to whether they're being real or not. And it really is, if you can do it right, it just comes across as good conversation, not as
Right. That's right.
drilling them,
You're very patient.
interrogating them.
You're very patient, Zach. I don't think I have that much patience, but I think also going back to business managers, they're the ones that'll say, we want proof of funds.
That's right.
And they'll ask, like a lot, or even my client will say, do they have proof of funds? And we're talking about maybe if it's a $6 million house, and I understand they want to know, don't want to vacate the house and have somebody come in that can't afford it and then be like, why did I clean up? Or, it's a lot.
If you've got a $6 million house, we're going to know who this buyer is.
Yeah.
And if we don't know the buyer, we should be able to hit 2 or 3 strokes on the keyboard, and everybody else knows the buyer. We're just late to the party.
Yeah.
This is not something that's going to be hard to find and verify.
Right, but they do want them, they want to know those funds are, especially if they're going to make a cash offer, they want to know they have the cash,
It's liquid.
so.
And then once you get to contract, if you have at a certain target points, this is another thing, certain milestones, non-refundable earnest money, maybe
Right.
start off with 50 grand, or then when you get through most of your contingencies, then make it 100 grand, 150, but have cold hard cash on and lots of it that is non-refundable.
Yeah.
There's also, you'll get a little bit of a gut feeling. If somebody calls you random about some expensive house they're wanting to see, there's a little app called Forewarn, and it's Forewarn. And you can take the number they called you from, you can ask a few questions. You can find out if they're driving a 1988 Sentra, odds are they can't buy a $3 million house. And if you look for felonies, and a lot of times the criminal record on there, if you really look, it's speeding. So
Lisa's on it.
Tennessee does not report that as a criminal activity, or else I would be on it. But I'm just saying, look, that's not a bad thing. It doesn't matter if it's $100,000 house. It's not a bad thing to know who you're meeting.
But you also have to be, so you're talking about patience, you have to be careful too, because sometimes it's very easy to be dismissive based on how somebody starts the conversation. I love, this is a very recent story. I got a call about a year ago from a guy on Kelly Clarkson's home. And he sounded really young, because he is really young, like 20s. I'm thinking, what 20-year-old can buy, $7 million house? And we're talking, and he's real enthusiastic and just, very charismatic, as you described earlier. And you're right. A lot of the whack jobs are very charismatic, and they're very good at getting indoors. That's their skill set. Sadly, they're just applying it the wrong way a lot of times. But very charismatic. We're talking, have a nice conversation. And I said, Jeff, what's your last name again? And he said, Welk. I said, Welk, W-E-L-K. He said, yeah. I said, like Lawrence Welk?
Yeah.
He said, that's my grandfather.
Mhm.
I said, really? And so as you're talking about, he's just talking about his grandfather, his parents, and I'm asking questions because it was legitimately of interest to me, because my grandparents loved the Lawrence Welk show. So I'm asking questions about the Lawrence Welk show, and everything he was talking about made perfect sense. And of course I'm Googling, Interestingly enough, that family has, the Welk family, as a result of the 26-year-old grandson calling, who's the one who drives the business, has purchased, Robert, what, 8 properties from us in the last 12 months?
Yeah.
Up, including most recently purchased the BB King building downtown.
Don't judge a book by its cover.
Yeah.
What questions do y'all have before wrapping up? Any other questions?
Yeah, I saw that.
For winter events, I'm not talking about one that would justify golf carts and a jazz band and dancing girls, but something in the $1 to $2 million category. I've been confronted with that question a couple of times and studied about COVID, so I didn't have to do it. But I've had conflicting advice over, I'm all about drinking, so I'm thinking, oh, let's have a cocktail party. But I've had other realtors who work in that space say, nah, people need to be home, they need to get their physical hook up and blah, 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 do lunch. If you want to serve champagne, that's fine, but that's what people are going to come to. And so again, not for a $6 million listing. Any thoughts on
The time of day for when to do, like, is it breakfast, brunch, lunch,
Yeah,
cocktails?
I've had breakfast events, I've had lunch events, and I've had cocktail events. So to me, it depends on the house. Like, I don't want to necessarily do a afternoon cocktail event when I know they're going to sit in traffic.
Oh.
So I'm like, oh no, that needs to be a lunch event or a breakfast event, because your breakfast event, you're not going to do at rush hour, you're going to do it just off rush hour. So to me, it depends on the house.
Yeah, and who you want to come. I mean, I find that realtors love lunch, free lunch.
I serve
I know. So, and I,
drink though, too.
Oh, I got
but I think that it does depend on the house. It depends if, they have a pool, we want them to see the lighting, we want them, whatever it might be, if that needs to be an evening, but we don't want to be on West End Avenue at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I mean, so all those things.
Okay, what do you got?
First of all, Mary Beth, you touched on this about pre-scheduling, like using showing time.
Mhm.
What do you think is the optimum time? Because you're not going to have overlapping showings, obviously. So how would you segment that if you're doing something like what you talked about?
Like
And then follow it up.
for like a showing,
Yeah.
the
Is that
30-minute
2
window.
hours or-
I do the 30-minute window because the chances of them getting there within that time versus the hour-long window. Is that, so you mean time of day also, or?
No, just the allotted time for them.
I do.
Dedicated time for the showing, and it's a 10,000 square foot house.
I don't sell many of those in town, but most of mine is 30.
Hour and a half.
I do an hour and hope they get there reasonably on time.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
I think most people know that the agent's meeting there, like, you'll try to arrange your showing so that you can actually get there first, or like at a specific time after lunch or whatever.
A home of that size could be a half a day ordeal, depending on where it's located,
Mhm.
very easily.
Getting
But
there.
you're not showing it 4 times a week either, unless you're in town like these guys and you have the luxury. Sells in 2 days.
Not always.
Second question, and again, you guys touched on that as well, is in writing a contract. I've had a couple of luxury listings, but when you're writing a contract for a buyer, how is it differentiated significantly maybe from a regular, standard listing? Is there certain clauses and things, we talked about money going hard and a certain time frame, that sort of thing, or there's certain things that you expect as a luxury agent to be in that contract?
Well, since COVID, you've got so many contracts that they're on 1 minute and then they change their mind. And so I haven't written anything, and I never would have done this before, but I've got 2-week occupancy after close. And I tell my clients, you pack your boxes and stuff, don't call the movers or don't have the movers there until after closing, because, you just don't want your clients moving out. So that's one thing that I try to include, but I also put it out there on the front end. And then if they can't do that, then I get non-refundable money.
Yeah.
If a buyer can't do that.
Large.
Yeah.
Large money.
When you say large, what percentage of the price?
I mean, we've done 200 grand, 300 grand, half a million, depends on the price point of the house.
1% maybe sometimes. and
Oh,
it just
wait,
dep-
yeah.
I don't do a percentage because for me, if somebody's moving out a $3 or $4 million house, 1% is not going to cover their moving if they've already moved out and the impact that it's made on their life and their business. And so
It's not
usually
enough pain either for the buyer.
It's-
It's gotta be painful for
So
the buyer.
it's usually
to lose it.
100, 200, something like that.
I was telling one time that this was a really, he said, I want $200,000 for non-fund warrants money. And I'm like, well, this is $1 million house. Like, what's this? What are you doing? He said, because I'm about to sign a 1-year lease at $16,000 a month.
Right.
And I'm gonna be on the hook for 200 grand if these people walk away. Because I can't just like bail on my lease. So if they're committed, then I can commit. I thought that was just an interesting way of looking at it too. It's like, yeah. And we talked to the buyer and they were planning on putting at least that much down. And so they had it, and they're like, yeah, they did it.
Yeah, buyers from different areas, when we say, oh, it's typical 1%, they're like, are you kidding? Yeah,
Yeah.
It's
it's
small.
nothing.
That is usually really low.
Mhm.
I'd spend a little more time also talking with the seller about what's going to remain and not remain. Because there's going to be some things that, I don't know, like a Peloton bike might remain or not, or some things that are attached that look like they would stay or not stay. So just spending a little more time on the front end on that would be helpful.
Definitely. I've gotten burned. Theater seats.
Yeah,
Yeah.
grandma chandelier.
All kinds of stuff.
Safes.
Are there any, so
Right,
just
safe
kind of wrapping up and chime in if there's anything we haven't covered that you want to cover, but are there any resources like blogs you read or, magazines you read, or just to kind of get, when somebody says, oh, it's designed by so-and-so, or the architecture so-and-so, how do people get to know who those names are and who those people are and what they mean? That can be a scary thing when a listing agent says, oh, this is a such and such design house, and this person did the landscaping, and it's like, no one knew that, I don't know who those people are. And then, where do you find that stuff out? Experience, or is there?
Well, I think, I do like architecture. I do like design. I do, if somebody says, oh, this person designed, I will go back and look. I'm not necessarily going to keep up on all the trends, but I do, example, I guess, for me is Voce right now. They have a certain architects that are in Voce, certain builders. And if my client's buying something there, I want to be aware of who those people are and what they've done. And, a lot of celebrities use celebrity designers, and, it's nice to, it's a small town, so it's not that hard here, it seems like, but
Do your research, and when you hear a name you don't know, take a minute
yeah,
and look it up.
yeah.
And you have colleagues, we have with our companies combined, we have a large resource of colleagues we can reach out to in every part of town. So there's never a time we should be able, there's always a time we should be able to reach out to somebody and get a quick answer. I bring Lisa all the time. Hey, Lisa, who's your favorite landscape architect?
Yeah.
Whatever. I want to say too, more of a global answer is if you don't already have the designation, the Institute for Luxury Home Marketing is a terrific class and designation. Robert and I took that. It wasn't even authorized, not authorized. It wasn't even.
It was with Parks
It was with Parks, yeah.
years ago.
It wasn't designation years ago, but anyway, it is officially a designation now. And it's a terrific class. It's 2 days of what we've done over the last hour, and it's intensive. And the other recommendation I would make is if you have the opportunity to do so, take classes like that or go to conferences, luxury conferences like that in other parts of the country that are feeder markets to Nashville. So if you have a chance to take the Institute of Luxury Home Marketing course, a 2-day course, if you can take it in Chicago or coastal California city or New York, do it there instead of here. It's a tax write-off. You meet lots of people who are agents sending people our way. It's a great way to make connections. There's a lot of fun to make a trip out of it. I've done it several times.
They also, WCAR just had it this past month. And it also counts towards your continuing education. And then once you are a member of the Luxury Institute, that it pays, you get a certain amount of free continuing education every year. So you have to pay a fee every year to continue to be in there, but then you get free continuing education, so it's worth it.
That's great. Well, thank you all very much. This is awesome. It's a powerhouse panel, so thank you very much. And, we now know who you are if we lose you, so.
Thanks, Zach. Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
guys. Good to see y'all.
Nice to meet you.
Finally facing face to face.
Yeah. Good info from